Good morning, and welcome to The Crawl, the show where we break down the future of search, brand authority, and everything else AI is rewriting about digital marketing. I'm Tristan Harris, your host, and today we're discussing AI adoption, data, and security with Jim Spignardo. Jim Spignardo is the Director of Cloud Strategy and AI Enablement at ProArch, where he helps organizations bridge the gap between emerging technology and real-world business impact. With deep expertise in cloud transformation, AI adoption, and enterprise modernization, Jim works closely with companies to develop practical strategies and improve operational efficiency, accelerate innovation, and drive measurable results. His approach focuses on making AI and cloud technologies actionable, not just aspirational, helping leaders navigate rapid technological changes with clarity and confidence. So, Jim, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for taking the time to join us and talk AI today. First, could you tell us a little bit about what a cloud strategist is for those in our audience who may not know?
Sure. I work very closely with our customers, usually our strategic customers, ones that see us as kind of their trusted advisors and consultants to help them find ways to leverage cloud technologies to mature their businesses. We're not necessarily looking to move them to the cloud or adopt any specific cloud technologies just for the sake of it. We're looking to try to create some justification of why and what benefit they could derive from making those moves. So that can include, moving from an on-prem exchange environment or on-prem file systems to M365. It could be, lifting and shifting servers to Azure Cloud. It could also be, refactoring or re-architecting a homegrown application or some sort of line of business application that needs modernization. But more recently, too, it also includes conversations and tooling and platforming around AI services as well.
Awesome. And you also, I've been told, wrote a book titled The AI Turning Point, which
I did.
is a no nonsense guide for business leaders navigating the AI revolution. So, how did you come up with the idea to write a book? A lot of people, I think a lot
Yeah.
of people are like, I'd love to write a book, but never put
I,
pen
I
to
kind
paper.
of I kind of did it on a little bit of an ego dare thing. I've been going around to a lot of conferences lately with folks who are Microsoft valued professionals, MVPs, and actually being on other podcasts and folks that have had books, and I'm like end up buying their book. And so as part of my New Year's resolution, I said to myself, you know what, I write a lot. I spend about I write about 3 articles a week on LinkedIn. And what I thought was, well, there's probably a story, and it's hundreds of articles at this point. There's probably a story I could weave or a narrative I could create out of certain themes of those articles. And that was kind of the inspiration for it. And I didn't want it to be a technical guide, right? I've always, I'm a technical person, but I don't think it would have came off as overly authentic. I think where my real strengths are is in business and talking business with organizations. So this is really much more a business conversation about how to approach AI in a way to ensure success, and that includes looking backwards at what legacy debt the organization has currently and what processes and ways of working are you trying to drag into the future without addressing kind of the elephant in the room. And it really is written as kind of a story. There's characters. You take a journey with this fictitious company and you learn about how they're struggling to adapt to the AI turning point. And, at the end, there's kind of a happy ending about, how do they finally overcome these challenges and learn how to, based on the personalities of the different team members and the roles, make this stuff work for them.
That's awesome. I have a lot of respect that you went out and managed to not only write a book about what is a technical topic, but turn it into something that is relatable and has
Yeah.
that kind of through storyline. I think that's really interesting. So topic of discussion that kind of leads into it, right? Is AI adoption is accelerating very fast, but many companies are struggling to move beyond basic experimentation.
Hmm.
What's the biggest barrier that you're seeing right now?
I'd say the biggest barrier is just really knowing how to get started. And having a playbook of what does adoption look like and how to get off their dime, get off the dime essentially. So we have a really tight program that kind of goes through first explaining what AI is. We are a Microsoft shop, so it's very Copilot focused, but and then diving into prompting and features and capabilities, but that quickly also turns into a conversation about governance and risk review. We spend a lot of time on use case development, which we find is probably the most um, significant portion or critical portion of that engagement because it helps organizations look at what they do today and how they can apply AI to solve problems. And that usually helps them start to learn how to apply this technology in a meaningful way and kind of starts to build that adoption momentum that they're looking for. And once they have that in place and they can demonstrate to the organization the success of those particular use cases, we spend a lot of time helping them establish metrics and KPIs and to make sure that they can actually translate that back to dollars and cents and time and efficiency. That usually builds upon itself, and then that creates the momentum.
It's a
Right now they
snowball effect.
yeah, yeah, and then they feel confident that they can continue that process. It's rinse and repeat, essentially.
Yeah, that's so we have a lot of guests from tons of different industries that are AI focused or AI adjacent, or just people that use AI and implement it in their workflows. One of the most common things we see is that building out that use case is so important to getting started, and
Mm,
it's so important to helping guide it so it doesn't go off the rails. Something you mentioned too was risk assessment,
yep.
and there's a lot of discussion around security, compliance risks, and things like that. What do you think organizations can do to drive AI adoption without creating those security and compliance risks?
I think a big part of it is establishing the appropriate guardrails. You have to have a committee or a governance council, and you have to have a real well-defined AI usage policy. That's kind of table stakes, and that helps your organization at least understand where is AI permitted to be used and where is it not permitted to be used, and it really reminds everyone, what type of data are we being stewards of. If we're in a healthcare industry, we have patient health information. If we're in a banking industry, it's financial or personal identifiable information, and we need to understand what is and is not acceptable. Beyond that, though, there still needs to be some sort of technical controls that get implemented to help them get the visibility into what's actually occurring. Right? Because sometimes your policy is great, but it's only as good as the application and the adherence to it. So having tool sets, in our case, we use Microsoft Cloud Apps for security, and also things like Agent 365, to be able to give that organization visibility into who's using what, where, what are they putting in these tools. And then lastly, we really lean heavily into establishing good data loss prevention and information protection. So if you are in a regulated industry, making sure you're labeling sensitive information and protecting it from misuse. So,
Yeah, this is a really important thing that a lot of people don't consider when they're, getting into implementing AI and building it out. You can't, especially if you're in an industry that handles PII, HIPAA data,
Mhm.
financials, whatever it is, you can't wait to build the guardrails until you see where the car drove off the cliff, right?
Well,
You need
right,
to do it ahead of time, right?
right.
And that's something that a lot of people aren't considering if they're not managing AI adoption at a company level. If they're simply letting employees kind of build it into their workflow, use tools, and run with it, a lot of them
Mhm.
aren't considering that there could be issues like that. There's, I think we've seen a handful of horror stories have come out. One recently was, somebody built an agent to automate something and delete it out of the company's database,
Yeah.
and it's
No,
like
I've heard those stories. Yeah, sure.
it's terrifying. And yeah, you really need to take this not as a, oh, it's a shiny new tool that I just need to play around with and figure out, but it's a,
Yeah.
cohesive strategy, and take a lot of that into account.
Yeah, and not to get too morbid, it's kind of like handing loaded handguns to everybody in the organization, right? In the
Yeah.
same time, we wouldn't allow everyone to choose their own word processing application, right? You'd standardize and you'd govern it,
Yeah.
and so somehow with AI, that's become acceptable, and to a certain degree, you want to encourage experimentation and you want to encourage people to be innovative, but you also want to be very intentional. And that's the other thing we try and get companies to understand is now more than ever, this cannot be one of those things that organically develops in your organization. I think back to like the SharePoint days. SharePoint, and I've used SharePoint for many many years. But typically, it got installed by the IT department, and there was no governance and people just started throwing things in it. And then another department goes, can we use that too? And then, 60 years down the road, you had this thing that was just a utter mess and chaos.
Yeah. That's actually a good example to compare it to. I think part of this, and you mentioned you wouldn't get away with having 10 CRMs or whatever somebody
Right.
wanted to use,
Yeah.
or 10 chat programs or whatever. I think part of that is because companies have been uh, maybe not incentivized, but they've been told like we have to move faster with AI, right?
Yeah.
Like if we don't adopt it today, our competitors are. We have to move quickly. So that brings the question of how do you balance moving quickly and innovation across a large corporation or a large team
Yep.
with that kind of protecting sensitive data or compliance issues like that is almost two competing priorities.
To a degree, yeah, I would agree. And I go back to the governance council and having a group that owns that space. And, I look at what we do around, for instance, agent development. Right now, if you want an agent developed, it has to go through a intake process, has to be evaluated for the cost associated with it, has to get a security review, and we do permit people to kind of make uh, personal agents
Mhm.
that can assist them with their own individual work. But anything that's going to touch a broader audience has to go through a rigorous process and be evaluated. At the same time, we have to understand that we don't want to overgovern. I talk about this in my book a little bit too, because over governance can actually squash innovation. And so it is a balance, and ultimately it's about establishing guardrails and keeping visibility. So in our organization, we even permit some third party SaaS AI solutions. Yeah, I mentioned we used Defender for Cloud Apps. Defender for Cloud Apps actually evaluates SaaS solutions, AI solutions, based on privacy and security on a scale. And if that solution scores above an 8, we permit it. Right? We keep eyes on it. We
Yeah.
make sure we understand who's using it and what they're doing with it, but we permit it. If it scores anything less than that, it's blocked. And then you have to come up with a justification for why you feel this is important to use in your particular role. So we're trying to create a more open kind of experimental atmosphere at the same time of putting the appropriate guardrails in place and controls too.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of companies out there are seeing the opposite, right? Where people are just moving quickly and reaching out to whoever's involved and be like, "Hey, could I get the API key for XYZ? I want to build it
Yeah,
into this." And it's
yeah,
it's like, well, hold on, let's put some thought into how this is going to be used.
right.
What kind of risk that opens to, and all of that.
Yep,
So definitely something I've seen firsthand where I've had this conversations where it's like, I think this is a really good
for
idea.
sure.
Let's make sure we can do it in a way that doesn't, destroy the
Yep,
company.
yep, yep.
So I guess that leads to, the, the question is, how should company leaders limit or consider employee access to AI platforms and data permissions? So you mentioned the governance council. Can you kind of like walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah. So in our case, our governance council consists of an executive sponsor who is our CEO. I'm the chair of that group because I'm in charge of AI enablement, but it also includes stakeholders from other important departments within our organization. So, our head of legal and finance, our head of HR, our head of security, and our CIO, CISO. He's in that meeting, as well as some of the people who are more tech savvy with AI. And we have an established charter that really kind of lays out to the organization of where we're going with this technology, what we're hoping to get out of it, making it a way to empower them, not replace them, so to speak, and then giving them very clear pathways to bring ideas forward that they can have evaluated. At the same time, establishing a policy that clearly states what is and what is not acceptable, right? These are the tools you're permitted to use in these specific ways. And these are the tools you can use in more constricted ways. And then everything else has to be approved. At the same time, like I said before, making sure that you have visibility into what people are doing to validate. Um, One thing I would say that was very valuable for us too was going through an exercise of actually inventorying all of our systems of record and just data repositories, and it's making sure that there is a clear owner of each one of those and understanding how they're integrated. Um, who uses it, what do they use it for, and what type of security already exists for that, so that when we have these conversations and someone comes to us and says, I really want to make an integration with this line of business application. Well, this is the person who owns it. You need to talk to them because you can't just tap into that. And we also have to make sure that whatever solution you're going to use is doing this in a manner that is not introducing undue risk to our organization. And assuming all those guardrails are put in place, and we now know about it, right? Knowing is they sound like GI Joe here, right? Knowing is how. um, it's what you don't know. It's what really is where the biggest risk lies.
Yeah, that ties into the idea, and something I harp on here is trust but verify, right? Trust that the team is following the guidelines that you set in place, but also probably don't just close your eyes and stick your head in the sand. Make sure it's
100%.
happening.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that we've talked about security a lot. Talking kind of shifting more towards adoption.
Hmm.
How can companies encourage teams to actually use AI instead of resisting it,
Yeah.
and also do so in a way that doesn't open risk and compliance issues?
Yeah, it's really important to create kind of that culture of innovation. And we were very, I'm going to reuse that term again, intentional when we started our journey over 2 years ago. And we rolled out this technology to um, teams in phases. Each month we would add a new team, and we would give them specific training, and actually develop use cases for them to allow them to see immediate value. Beyond that, we've also created a champion program, and I lead the adoption. So we do things like tips and tricks, a weekly newsletter. We also do an AI news briefing. We have several teams channels that are dedicated to AI. I run a monthly user group internally where we set them up as workshops so people get to use, there's exercise files they have and they actually get to try these things out and experiment, as well as making yourself available through things like office hours. So if someone has an idea they want to work on, or they need assistance, or they can come to you and actually bounce some ideas off you. So it really is a very extensive program that we've built to really underscore how significant this technology is to our business now, in probably more ways than we've done for any other thing that we've ever adopted. Right? We don't do this for Office. We probably could. Right? We don't have the PowerPoint tips and tricks in Excel, but we do for Copilot.
Yeah, I guess, you don't, it's kind of along the same lines of you don't really need a driver's license to drive a golf cart, but you do to drive a car, right? Or a
Right.
Ferrari.
Yeah.
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 It's very, very different at different levels of technology. An interesting thought I had when we were talking about this, we talk a lot about AI security, but we're not talking a ton about how AI is being applied to things like cybersecurity. So how
Yeah.
AI is being utilized, or how it could revolutionize cybersecurity. Is that something that you have interest in or experience with? Is that something that you can
Yeah.
kind of dive into?
Yeah, we actually have our own managed security practice, and we actually have our own security operations team. And so right now, the team is using some third party products, but we're also using Copilot for security, and allowing that to help us identify threats more quickly and the path to remediation. And that really helps more of our junior security analysts kind of not have to continually interrupt our senior analysts to really learn
Yeah.
what a threat looks like and how to appropriately deal with them. Also helps, it's interestingly enough, with the communication that goes to the customer. Right? Sometimes we forget that's kind of the most important piece of the conversation is, how do I take this information I have and translate this very technical explanation down to something that the customer can understand about, hey, we just stopped this threat, helped you resolve it, and so on and so forth. Um, there's definitely going to be some more opportunities, and we intend to uh, use more and more AI in this coming, our fiscal year start in April. But over our SOC team to, help with automated remediation as well. Uh, there's really no part of our business that isn't touched by this stuff now, including even our digital engineering development team, which are using it to help them code and actually look at and actually find bugs in their code as well. Right? And it's
Mhm.
actually, I read an article recently that AI is actually somewhat better at finding problems in software than actually writing software sometimes. Right? And so, but going back to our security team, one of the other things that they're using it for is to help them. We do penetration testing and ethical hacking with our customers. It's helping them better build more effective campaigns
Mhm.
to really test our customers' security layers in a way that you kind of have to do because the bad guys are already using this stuff, right? So we've
Yeah.
really created more impressive campaigns that have been a lot harder for companies to, and it's helped our customers actually strengthen their security more.
It's actually interesting. I didn't think of you think of AI helping get people and, the hackers and all of that. You don't necessarily think about how it's an arms race with people that are doing ethical hacking and pen testing to,
Yep.
help companies out. So that's actually really interesting. They're probably able to scale it much quicker and find vulnerabilities much quicker. Not that this is an area I know much about, to be frank, but
Right.
definitely pretty interesting.
Yeah, I would say our phishing campaigns that we run, not only internally but with our customers, um, we're finding that the people that get targeted by this are like, wow, that is really sophisticated because you were able to now go through their inbox as though we were someone who got access to their email and
uh,
directly target that individual, right? Just asking AI, hey, go look at some stuff and create me a phishing email based on what. So
oh
you're
man,
all of a sudden receiving a phishing email from someone you just spoke to yesterday for something you actually thought you were expecting, right? So
that
it's
is
getting
terrifying. Actually,
yeah, it's
that
getting very very aggressive.
there is. eh, I don't think I've worked at a company where the IT department usually runs phishing tests to help educate and all of that. I don't think I worked at a company that at least a few people haven't fallen for the internal
Yeah,
tests. So and those are usually not personalized,
right. Yep. Yep.
So I didn't even think of the use case of if somebody had this public persona and they are let's say they spoke on stage with somebody at a conference and then they got
Yep.
an email from that person saying, hey, I wanted to follow up after the conference,
Yeah.
do you mind, doing something, or, all
Yep.
of that, like
Yeah.
that's
As my profile has increased and I'm more active on LinkedIn and, I've been going to more conferences and doing more podcasts, I've actually had to really step up my game and kind of be more on guard as well. I didn't realize, doing that is definitely exposed me in a way I didn't expect. So I definitely have to be more mindful of that and be much more untrusting and skeptical.
yeah, you have to become very cynical about anything that hits your inbox.
Yeah.
I evaluate links about 30 times. If I'm like still on the fence, I just open it on my wife's laptop and we're good. I'm kidding. No, never click the links. Uh, so listen, back on the topic of kind of like consulting with companies and talking about AI. Do you guys ever feel overwhelmed about the pace of kind of keeping up with the changes that are being made in AI? And do you deal with companies that feel overwhelmed by that kind of fast paced AI innovation?
I would say we're doing a pretty good job of staying on pace. I'd say we actually were probably a little ahead of the curve initially, even with the services we were promoting to our customers. It wasn't until probably last summer that you know the floodgates opened and everybody was like, "Hey, we want to engage. We got to do something with you guys." But we're absolutely hearing it from our customers. In fact, I just got off a call today with a customer. We were doing one of our initial workshops, and the caveat at the end. This was what a lot of the executives caveat at the end of this meeting was the president of the organization coming on and going, you know, we are remember limiting this to just the pilot group and no one's going to be able to create agents except this one individual and so there's this whole kind of legal disclaimer at the end of the meeting because there's just so much anxiety and concern that if they don't do it right something bad's going to happen and sometimes we have to talk them down a little bit and go you're here, you're talking to us, that's a good start. And
Mhm.
so, as long as you're aware of the potential risks, that's a good start. And you don't have to just turn it all off and pretend it doesn't exist. 'Cause let's face it, we got to move forward with this stuff. Um, and you can take your time. That's the other thing I try and impart to some customers. Not every industry is adopting this as fast as everybody claims they are, right? And there's a little bit of this keeping up with the Joneses, where I tell folks move cautiously but intentionally, but move right, even if it means you're taking really tiny baby steps. But don't also feel like you have to be pressured into a situation to implement when you're not ready.
Yeah, something the guests our guest last week talked about was using AI is putting out a jetpack, right? And you better make sure you're pointed in the right direction, or you're going to end up miles away from where you intended to be. And
Yeah.
I feel like that holds true with the security aspect of it too. Is make sure
Mhm.
you're not going to go straight headfirst into a wall.
And part of that is making sure you're deciding on tool sets and platforms that inherently have those capabilities in them, right? I think a lot of times we're seeing this with customers. They're gravitating to the next shiny object, the next thing that's being promoted in the media, and then it's not necessarily an enterprise tool. So the thought process there is, if unless you have a really good plan of how you're going to protect this, stay away from those, right?
What are some of the platforms that have a more robust built-in versus some of the ones that should be avoided?
Yeah, and I mean, we're like I said before, we're a Microsoft partner. We're Copilot specialists. We have our data and AI specializations and security specializations. We really feel that platform is very strong in that it protects your data in the environment. It's also very usable because it already has access to the data you need to feed it, as well as has a really robust security platform to protect not only the use of Copilot but also third-party solutions as well. So that's kind of top of mind. If you're in the Google universe, to a certain degree, you have some controls over. If we're using G Suite or something like that. I don't think it's to the level of sophistication that Microsoft has. Google is not known for having a tremendous security stack. Um, and I would argue probably the big players apart from Google, the Anthropics and the Chat GPTs of the world, if you're using their enterprise solutions, that's a good start. If you really have no other choice, or you really feel strongly about that, you can't pay for the pro or plus models. You have to pay for the enterprise solutions because you need to have controls and you need to have visibility. Um, and again, they're limited, but if that's the path you're going to go, they're going to be expensive. So
Yeah, that's a valid point. Um, so what advice would you give to any companies or people listening today that wants to really start driving AI adoption safely,
yep,
that maybe has already started? What
yeah.
are kind of like the three steps that you would recommend?
I would first say get an AI usage policy and make sure everybody reads it, and it's very clearly spelled out what is and what is not acceptable. Um, Secondarily, invest in security tools. You need that visibility. You need that visibility to make sure that you are aware of how this stuff is being used, what it's talking to, who's using it, how they're using it, and being able to prevent it if you want to. And then lastly, make sure that you have a good adoption program. Create a center of excellence. That center of excellence includes a governance council, but it also includes AI literacy training for new onboards. It includes use case development, and it includes creating a champions program that people have resources to go to. We can't expect them to essentially, you know, gravitate and learn this on their own. There have to be people who are. This is as I say in some organizations. If you don't already have someone in your organization who has AI in their title, either part time or full time, you should have it in the next 12 months, and that may mean hiring someone or shifting job responsibilities of an existing individual, or even partnering with a company like ProArch, where you can outsource that type of role to an organization. But it's that important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, we touched on it earlier, but there's more and more and more and more horror stories coming out of companies that are using AI, not taking the proper cautions, and kind of reaping the benefit of that. Um,
Mhm.
so we're coming up near time, but we'd like to do a rapid fire session at the end of our
Sure.
podcast. So if you could just give us a one word or short answer responding to the question. So
Sure.
number one on the lightning round, what's the biggest AI myth?
That's a good one. Um, the biggest AI myth I would say is that the AI is going to take over the world, right? It's going to subjugate humans.
Yeah, Skynet. Yeah, yeah. We're I don't think we're quite there yet. Um, what's one AI tool you use every day? I assume Copilot.
It is, but also ChatGPT. I love Notebook LM. If I'm going to go to a conference and I'm trying to kind of create a package of material to get learn on a subject really fast, I find that Notebook LM is a really good tool for that. And I can also share with my colleagues who are going to the same conference, so we kind of all get trained on the plane, so to speak, while we're flying there.
While you're on the way. What's the most overrated buzzword in tech right now?
Um, I'm going to probably get in trouble for this one, but the term frontier, I find and again, that came from Microsoft. I joked about it in an article that I wrote on LinkedIn, but I think that term frontier is a definitely a big buzzword.
All right. Next one, I was going to ask what your favorite productivity hack is, but I think you touched on it on learning on the plane. But are there any other favorite productivity hacks?
I like to use AI to help me use AI, which sounds weird, but if I'm trying to, for instance, create draft instructions for Copilot to know more about me, I will ask it to write me instructions based on what it knows about me, right? Or if I'm trying to, I like using prompts where I get interviewed by the agent or the chatbot, where it asks me a bunch of questions, and then that uses the answers to those questions to give me better results.
We had a guest mention that a couple months ago, probably now, and I had never thought of it that way. And I had started doing that afterwards, and it really is. It helps you hone in a way that just kind of
Yeah, 100%.
directing didn't. And then my last question was going to be, what's your go-to response when someone says AI is taking over? But that was also your response to the biggest AI myth. So
Yeah, but unfortunately, my kids are of Gen Z, and they have that. There's definitely a fear and trepidation in that generation. And again, I think it's mostly because they it's a different workforce they have to get into,
yeah,
and so it's an easy scapegoat, right, for some of the challenges that they face. That
yeah,
to a certain degree, every generation has faced.
yeah. My kids are a little bit younger. They're 2.5 years and 8 months. But
Yeah.
I'd be lying if I didn't say that's a concern I thought of.
Mhm.
It's something my wife and I have talked about as well. How is this going to change the workforce? How is this going to change opportunities for them in the future? And we keep coming back to, it's industrialization and it's,
Yep.
things change, like
Yep.
what were people saying when the internet came out, and started being implemented at businesses. So I
Mhm.
think that I think you're right. I think it'll just be different. Um, but yeah, I definitely agree with that. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for kind of walking us through the intersection of AI and security, and kind of giving us some good advice on what we should all be doing to make sure that we're not walking ourselves off of a cliff with unsecure AI usage. So before we close out, I like to give our guests a chance to kind of tell the audience where people can find them. You know, go ahead and talk about your LinkedIn, socials, whatever you like to do. Your book.
Sure. Yeah. As I mentioned at the top of this podcast, I write about three different articles for a newsletter I call Control Alt Innovate on LinkedIn. Um, I'm the only Jim Spignardo on LinkedIn, so I'm very easy to find. I would also say, as you mentioned, my book, The AI Turning Point, small read, quick read. It can be found on Amazon, either the ebook version or the paper version, if you like. So seek that out. And again, our company ProArch puts on webinars for pretty frequently, usually one or two a month. I'm actually doing another one tomorrow with a couple of our security team members on Microsoft Purview and AI. So if you go to proarch.com, it's probably not too late to register for that, but I don't know when this is coming out. So, but that's primarily where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you again, Jim. And thank you to everybody listening on your way to work or in your office or at home. If you like this episode, please make sure to follow us on the platform of your choice, leave a review. And as always, please comment on topics you'd like us to cover. It really helps us when we're sourcing guests and when we're kind of trying to figure out what people want to hear about. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time.